week was its book birthday, but it is still relatively new, so it still gets a happy belated birthday round of applause. And that book is One Jar of Magic, and we have its author, Corey Ann, with us. Sorry, my screen. My cat, everyone, I apologize. I'm going to put him away. But we have Corey Ann Haydu with us, and we are celebrating her book, One Jar of Magic. Yay! And she is going to be in conversation with Brandy Colbert, who is also another great author as well. I'm going to quickly read you their bios, and then we'll get into house rules, and I will pass it off to our authors. So Corey Ann Haydu is the author of Eventown, Rules for Stealing Stars, The Someday Suitcase, and many other acclaimed books for teens. Now, she grew up in the Boston area, earned her MFA at the New School, and now lives in Brooklyn, New York with her family. Brandy Colbert is the award-winning author of Little and Lion, Point, Finding Yvonne, and The Revolution of Bertie Randolph. Her short fiction and essays have been published in several critically acclaimed anthologies for young people. She is on faculty at Hamline University, MFA program in writing for children, and lives in LA. So yay, she's close to San Diego. Now, I am really excited because One Jar of Magic, well, we're a genre bookstore, so we all love a good fantastical story, and also a story in which you have to find yourself. And with One Jar of Magic, we have a girl, and she's supposed to be super magical and powerful and amazing because her dad is like, I'm the almighty, most powerful guy in town. But as we find, there comes about where there is a night of collecting magic in jars, and as the title suggests, she only gets one jar of magic, and that opens up a journey for her where she belongs and self-discovery. And on that beautiful note, I am going to pass it off to Brandy. But wait, I jumped the gun beforehand. The chat is to the right hand, where you guys can see and give all the love to these authors that is very well deserved. If you have any questions, make sure and ask them down below where it says ask a question. That is indeed where you can click and ask a question. Make sure you take advantage of that because events are so much fun with your questions. The authors are at your mercy. And then also the best way to celebrate a book and to say, dear author, I love your work, is to purchase said book. So if you would like to purchase these authors' books, click the purchase book and book plate button down below. Now, on that note, I'm going to pass it off to Brandy and Corey, and I will see you guys at the end of the event. Bye.
Thanks, Constance.
Thank you.
Hi, Corey.
Hi, Brandy. It's so close to being together. And
I know. It was like our 3,000 miles apart, or 3 hours apart, but made it happen. I'm very excited. So I have a bunch of questions for you. So if I'm ever looking down, it's because I had to write them down. But I think you were going to start out with like a reading for us.
Yes, I wanted to set the magical tone, plus my actor self can't resist an opportunity to read out loud. So I'm going to read from a chapter a little bit into the book, and Constance gave a great little synopsis of what's happening. But essentially, Rose is at a lake trying to capture magic for the first time in her 12 years, and she has a lot of pressure on her from her magical family, and is just very, very sure it's all going to go well. Okay, here we go. And she's just sort of scooped a jar out of the lake. I lift the jar of magic high above me. It's easier to see what you've got that way, my father says. Magic needs a little light on it, and the sun is bright enough to help now, so I hold the jar this way and that, looking for the flicker, the shimmer, the glint, the diamond of light that appears on the surface of the lake. The jar is full, but not with magic, just with lake water. Two Blue Lake has the prettiest water in the world, but there's a difference between beautiful and magical, and Rose Alice Anders is supposed to be able to tell the difference. I dump the contents back into the lake and try again. Dad says the best magic capturers are resilient. He calls it grit and I call it hope, but it's all the same. It means you don't let one jar of lake water ruin your day. I lower the jar back into the water and rush at a glint of sunlight sparkling in all that blue. I throw my whole body at it. Then I lift my jar to the sky and peer underneath. Just lake water again. More buses are rolling in and cars behind them. Somewhere, Lyle and Mom and Dad are driving around a corner, seeing the sign for Two Blue Lake, wondering if I've caught the first magic. It's too late for that, but I'm positive that I will catch a little bit of lake magic. I'll be the first one to do it, something that's never been done before by a kid who is only 12. I walk farther into the lake. My jeans get soaked. I walk all the way to my waist, and my mustard-colored hoodie isn't dry anymore, but none of that matters. Nothing matters except the jar and the glint and the magic I am about to proudly possess. I skim the jar across the water, thinking about fireflies and heartbeats and Dad's lucky scarf around my neck and how much he loves me and my destiny to be Rose Alice Anders, the next great capturer of magic. I do not think about Ginger and Maddie and their laughter as it peels across the lake's surface. I don't think, not even for one little bit, about what will happen tomorrow and next week and next month if Ginger and Maddie are now best friends and I am not a best friend anymore. I don't think about the never hearing magic and the never feeling very magical and the always wondering why Dad has so much magic and Mom has so little, and if any of that makes any sense. I don't think about how I once whispered to Lyle, "Do you trust magic?" and how he didn't answer. I don't think about how very, very cold it is and how very, very wet my clothes are. I let my heart find the magic, and it does. I'm positive it does. I feel my heart surge and my eyes get a little weepy and my hands shake, and I swear I can hear it now. Magic. It's a hum and a whisper and the world's tiniest wind chime, and it's beautiful, and it's mine. I lift the jar into the sky. People have gathered along the shore, kids in my class, but others too, older kids, parents, teachers. I'm pretty sure I can see Lyle's long hair and Mom's sharp shoulders and Dad's scruffy beard. Lake magic, I call out. I say it loud enough for my father to hear. I want him to be part of this moment with me. I want him to know that I have believed everything he's ever told me, and I have the gift he promised I would have, and that I am the greatest young capturer here on Two Blue Lake. I want him to see that magic found me because I was worth finding. I captured lake magic, I say again, lifting my jar even higher up, even closer to the sun, so that the glint will reach shore, will bounce off the lake's surface and the sun's beams and really show itself off. Rose, my father calls back. I wait for his congratulations. Maybe he will run through the water to reach me, lift me into the air, kiss my hair. Maybe he will cry. I did it, I call back. Rose, Dad says again, more stern this time. He isn't diving into the lake water. He isn't grinning from ear to ear. In fact, he doesn't look very happy at all. And that's where I'll leave you.
Oh my God, I love hearing actors read anything. That was amazing. And also, I'm so glad you chose that part because I was literally like pulling my shirt over my head when I was reading it. It was so embarrassing.
It's like the easiest kind of scene to write, right? That like visceral embarrassment where you're like, yes, oh, I know.
Like, oh my God.
It could go on forever. If it lasts forever, it gets even worse.
Exactly. I was like, get her out of there, but also not because it was amazing. So, okay. So this book is so incredible. I loved it. So I feel like you and I, we sort of have like, for anyone in the audience, I'll just sort of kind of explain. We've called ourselves life twins for years because we sort of have like these weird parallels in our lives or else like complete opposites. So you're a person who like, I feel like you incorporate magic so well into your stories. And I'm like the person who's very skeptical of magic. And there's some kinds I sort of believe in and some I don't. And so your first few stories were realistic contemporary. And then you kind of pivoted to including magic in your books, which was a surprise to me, but I absolutely love, and you do it so well. So can you kind of just talk about what magic means to you and kind of why you're able or why you want to include it in stories and how you're able to do it, just like everything about magic.
Always. Yeah, it's so funny. It was a surprise to me too, Brandy. I was like, how did I end up here? I'm not a magical person. But I think a lot of what happened is that because I lead so much with like emotion, and that's what I'm most interested in, and that's my in to sort of any story I'm working on. And there came a point where I just couldn't figure out how to turn up the volume on that emotion without something else. So magic almost was like I won't call it a cheat because it takes on a whole other type of work that you have to do, like the rule keeping of magic and the sort of world building and having to stay consistent is a different kind of really immersive work. But it helped me raise stakes like a little more easily and find that like emotional life in a different way than I was able to get at when I was writing straightforward contemporary. For some reason, those feelings like weren't as accessible to me in the real world. I needed like a volume switch over here, and that's sort of what magic ends up doing, because there's something about magic that constricts the world and the characters, and that makes everything like harder for them. And and like I said, sort of raises those stakes. So it started as like almost an experiment in how to make the world more intense. And then it tapped into like, oh, right, I'm actually this sort of like whimsical person. And I sort of had forgotten that while I was writing my contemporary novels. And I was like, oh, right, this is where I live. I forgot in like the fairy realm. Like that's really where I'm meant to be. So I think it was at first seemed like a weird decision, and then became so comfortable that now thinking of writing straightforward contemporary is hard. I'm like, but what? What's the cheat?
Right. That's really interesting that you say that about how it sort of like constricts your world because you have these certain rules. Because the magic I've always sort of been drawn to or okay with was like, you know, like the original Freaky Friday movie from like the 70s. There's no rules to that magic. They're like, literally nobody knows why it happens. It's just like it happens and then it's fine and everything's like messed up. And so I can get with that, but I don't know, like I love all the ways that you're able to incorporate it. Were there any stories that you particularly loved growing up that included magic in them?
Yeah, I mean, my absolute favorite book of basically all time is The Giver. And so that operates so similarly in that space that I like, which is like real life concerns with like something unreal, you know, making it harder for the characters. So in that way, it's like, oh, of course, like that book that I was drawn to, that because it did the same thing for me. It gave me a space to feel those feelings that's like just outside of reality. And I think that's a little bit of what magic does too, is like creates a safer, at least for me, it creates a safer place for me to go there. Because and I think it's no surprise that my first book that I used magic with was like quite close into my life, but I needed to create magic that was Rules for Stealing Stars. I had never really written about my family before. Mm-hmm. And it's like I had to create that space, and the magic was that. So I think when I was reading, I was similarly drawn to those books. Bridge to Terabithia, that gives you that space to engage with grief and things like that. I also just recently rediscovered The Last of the Really Great Whangdoodles, which is this novel by Julie Edwards, who is in fact Julie Andrews, the Julie Andrews.
Right.
And she's written some really great middle grade novels, and The Last of the Really Great Whangdoodles is like a really kind of wacky but cerebral book that I loved growing up, and I just revisited it recently, and it was like so interesting that that's what I was drawn to at that age, because it was also like deep stuff, but like with this sort of creature who grows new slippers every day. Like what? Why do both of those things exist in the same book? I don't know.
Right. I love that. And I love that I'm like nodding, but those all happen to be books that I didn't read as a kid. So I think we see where this is going.
Oh my God. Not even The Giver, Brandy?
No. I know.
I want to make you read it.
I know. Well, I could just read it. Yeah. You don't have to make me. Yes, I will add that to my list. I know it's just weird. Some of these books escape you, and then you start sort of thinking about like coming back to those, as especially people who write for kids, and thinking like, okay, what did influence me, you know, as a child. So
yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got back to your magical roots. We're all better off for it. So I kind of hate this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What was your inspiration for this story? And this kind of ties into it, but how do you come up with such original towns in your work? I was really intrigued by Belling Bright, the town in One Jar of Magic, especially once we, this is a spoiler alert, but once we learn that some people are not meant for magic.
Yeah. Oh boy. This was a book, and maybe the most of everything I've written that really came in like drips and drabs. And it was really the image first of the jar of magic and the title that were sort of in my head before anything else filled out. And I just got to say, I love the cover illustrated by Jamie Lynn, because this is like exactly what was in my head, right? It's gorgeous. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I sat in the coffee shop and I like pictured a mason jar with a glowing something in it. And I was like, I can do something with that. So yeah, it was first just the image. And then I had been interested for a long time in writing a book about jealousy. It's something that like I've dealt with a lot in my personal and professional life. Don't tell anyone. So it's like an emotion I felt like I hadn't gone into yet in my books. And I felt like I was wanting to go there. So the first part of the story that came to me was the friendship dynamic, which didn't end up being like the sort of biggest thrust of the book, although is a really big foundational element. But I wanted to explore what it means to have everyone have told you you're going to be a certain thing and to not be that certain thing, but other people around you are getting to be that certain thing. And I think a lot of us in the arts can understand what that feeling can be like, to be the magical person for a minute there. And then, you're in a world where there's lots of magical people, or you're not the most magical one. And so that was sort of the original image but as I was building out that friendship, sometimes, and I'm curious if you feel this too sometimes, Brandy, in your books, like you can feel that there's something else going on with that character, and you're like, why are you so upset about this friendship, and why do you need to be magical so badly, and like, why is this so urgent for you? It seems like something else is going on with you, Rose.
Right.
And that's when I started to build out her family life, and it became really clear to me that the pressure to be magical wasn't just like an internal thing, but was this really big and high stakes external force coming from her dad and her community at large, but in a really pointed way from her dad.
Yeah, I kind of love that, because I think some people assume that sort of all of our stories come to us like fully formed. You just sit down and you start typing it out chapter by chapter. And I think you and I are more like, I think we're like, we don't outline, we drips and drops, like you said. Sounds very familiar to me, where I'm like, how is this even a book? Like I'm still trying to figure out what it is.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I feel like the story, as I was reading it, and I texted you this earlier at some point when I was reading it, I just feel like the story is so layered. And, it can serve as like a metaphor for so many different things. Like first I was like, wow, this could really be talking about, religion. This could be talking about race. This could be talking about class. Like there were so many things, like anything that can really like unite or divide us. So I'm just curious, do you set out with this sort of intention as you write, or is it something that kind of comes to you more subconsciously, where you kind of look at it? Because I've had people point things out in my books and I'm like, oh my God, be like an event. And I'm like, I didn't even know that until like right this second that you noticed that. So
yeah, I definitely fall into that camp as well, where it's like, oh, I had no idea I was writing that. I was just writing about my feelings. I'll tell you that I had a realization maybe like a year ago when I had a YA novel come out this year as well. And I was maybe answering an interview question or something where I was thinking about that book and this book. And it occurred to me like, oh, I just wrote 2 books about like very corrupt power from a man in power. Like that's what those 2 books are about, and how, scary it is to live in a community where there is a really terrifying person in power, or that the power feels terrifying. I hadn't set out to write 2 books that were about, men in positions of power that, might abuse that power. But there I was I wrote these books probably in, 2017 and 2018 and 2019. And lo and behold, that's what they were about.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Like that's like how our brains kind of work. So our friend and fellow writer, Alana K. Arnold, talks about that a lot, about like theme and how, her books sort of are like, she'll have like kind of a duology of books that sort of, like tackle, power or shame or something like that. And they do end up kind of bumping up against each other. So I just think it's really interesting how our brains are sort of doing this thing and we don't really even understand it ourselves.
It's really weird. Like the things, I'd be interested in like what little things if you've had similar moments of like, oh, whoa, I'm writing this book about this thing I didn't know I was writing about. And you're like, oops, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, it can be kind of scary because then I'm like, I don't even know how to speak to that. Like that was an accident. And you want to sound like you actually totally made it happen on purpose. But anyway, okay, well, it's definitely working. Okay, so getting a little bit serious here. This book takes on domestic violence in a way where it's not the focus of the book, but it's very much an underlying tension that I think a lot of readers will grasp from the start of the story. Just sort of like, that man in power, her father that you're talking about. You're like, something's not quite right with this guy. Like, he's so charismatic and beloved in the town, but also like, I really did not trust him from the beginning. So how do you sort of, how do you approach writing? Because most of your books really deal with, serious topics like this. So how do you deal with writing about those kinds of topics for, teens and even, kids who are younger than teenagers?
Yeah, I mean, it's, first of all, just sort of like my passion. Like it's what I get the most excited about when I'm in it and I understand what the book is about. And I realize it's about something really big and hard to talk about and avoided in conversation or considered sort of too ugly to, bring up with kids. Like that's when I get excited. And that's when I like know how to write the book. Like I'm just sort of hanging out for a while. And then I'm like, oh, here's why I'm here writing it, because I'm not afraid to do it. And like that feels so good to feel really sure in that sort of, like mission is such a, whatever word, but to feel so like, yes, I know that this is what I need to do. Like these types of books have to be on shelves, and I know that I'm not afraid to write them, and I know that I needed them growing up. And I mean, that's like the most exciting part of the writing process to me. And I also think like when you're going through hard things at young ages, there is it's different for everyone. When I went through hard things at young ages, what was going on wasn't always totally clear to me. But it was like something's wrong, but I'm not at an age where I can fully grasp what that is. And I think that for me, that makes it easy to write those books for young readers, because I can write that space of confusion, of like something's wrong, but I don't know what it is. And I'm curious, but I also don't want to know, like there's something, it's not scary to write those books. You don't have to write like the most sort of on the page graphic. You certainly can. There's writers that do that really well. But what I know how to do is to live in that space of like, I'm 11 and something's wrong. Mm-hmm. Help, yeah.
Yeah, you do it so well. Because even though, I kind of got the sense that there was something a little bit off with, Dad and the way that he talks to and interacts with his family, it never felt like preachy, and it didn't feel like, oh my God, this is now shifting to be like a domestic violence book. Like you weave it in so well with, the other subplots and the other topics. And so then it just feels like you're just in it with the character. And then it's like, oh wait, like you're realizing it with them. And it's really powerful the way that comes across. And so just thank you for writing those books. I had a pretty idyllic childhood, like the racism aside, but a lot of people go through that. But I really could have used a lot more books like that were about families who are different from mine. And I just think it's useful for not only the kids who are going through it, who definitely need those books to know that they're not alone, but it can also, obviously help other kids with their empathy and understanding. Maybe that kid's a jerk because they have a really horrible home life or, any other reason. So, okay. I want to encourage our lovely audience members to ask any questions down in the question box. I have more questions, but I'm sure we'll want to hear from some of you. So, all right. You mentioned as you were reading my middle grade novel that you were like, oh, these have like a similar friendship trajectory. So I was like really excited about that. Both of our main characters are 12 years old. And so, I remember probably the worst friendship fight I ever had as a kid was the summer between 6th and 7th grade when I was 12. And it was just awful. And it was just a summer of exchanging, bad phone calls and, she said this and all of that. So what do you think it is about that age where that introduces all these new friendship dynamics and all these friendship issues?
Oh man. It's such a tough, I would say 4 or 5 years from sort of 10 to 14, 15. And my perspective on it is really specific because I lived on both sides of that. I had some really cruel stuff that I participated in when I particularly remember in 6th grade, I wrote an anonymous letter about, things I didn't like about a person to a friend,
I remember this story.
The truth master. I mean, yes. Horrifying, horrifying. And then, and then I went through some really, really difficult endings of friendships, in similarly really cruel ways. So God, what is it? There's something about, I do think a big part of it is adolescence, the physical and burgeoning sexuality part of adolescence is bringing out difference in a way that can be very complicated. And if you don't have a great space to discuss that, the way you process it is play with it, right? See what happens if you play with those levers. I don't know. I think that's a big part of it. And adolescence and pre-adolescence are really long, and where everyone is on that spectrum forever, is different. And particularly in those 5 years or so can be quite different. And I do think that drives a lot of upset in friendships. Interests changing and how you're presenting yourself changing and what you care about changing. Those feel really scary when you're in a really close friendship. That loss of wait, we care about all the same things. Why do we suddenly care about different things? It's just saying it hurts my heart because there's something so hard about that time. And because you're not mature, I think that happens in other times in our lives. After college, we start going in these different directions and, who's getting married when and who's taking this type of job. And, but we're older, so we can handle that in an appropriate way. And you just can't handle it at 11. You have to experiment with it at that age. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my God, that's great. I think I was kind of asking for 12-year-old Brandy too. Because I was just looking back at that summer, I'm what happened? We were fine. And then it was someone just flipped a switch and it was these are your enemies.
Yes, it's so strange. And I don't know if you're in touch with any of the people from that age, but there's people who there was real cruelty on both sides of the relationship that now when I interact with them, however briefly on Facebook, it's all love. It's oh my God, I can't believe I stole your favorite stuffed animal at camp and did horrible things with it. It's why would I ever do that? I don't know.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah. And not that I was like an angel either. So yeah, it's a very confusing time. But I like seeing that in your book. It just feels like, I'm sure it feels really comforting to kids that age, because I'm sure they're still going through that now, just as we did, and just being confused and wondering if they're doing something wrong. And it's like, no, it's just a natural part of growing up. So
yeah, well, and the shame makes it so much worse, right? Like, if I think ultimately, like, I want the books to show those really difficult feelings and dynamics that are like shit that you feel, I don't like love thinking back on writing like an anonymous letter to a friend. Like, that's awful, right? But if you can talk about it, it like creates a space for it to not be shameful, but to be like a thing you can own and connect on and like come to terms with and understand why you're doing it. And like the impulse to not talk about stuff and to be like, that's a bad jealousy, that's a terrible feeling, definitely never ever mention it, and that's the best way to handle that. Well, that's not gonna work.
Yeah, that's kind of the family I grew up in, where it was like, what, this uncomfortable thing, like, deal with it, it'll just go away.
Press it down forever.
Exactly. And this is why we're writing books about this stuff now, 30 years later.
Exactly.
Okay, I am going to now switch to the audience questions, so we still have time to take more. But the first one, this is a nice juicy question. It says from Lisa. And Lisa says, Corey, your books always operate on two levels. There's the primary, usually magic component, and then a secondary issue, i.e. grief, suicide, abuse. You weave these two together so perfectly, and it makes me wonder if you have these two ideas firmly established before you start writing the book, or does one element precede and then you figure out how to work in the other one?
It's almost always that the magical element comes first, and then the sort of topic, often like difficult situation the character is dealing with is like the answer to the question, why would this magic exist? Why do I need this magic? What would make this magic more difficult to navigate? That sort of question. I particularly remember with Rules for Stealing Stars, because it was my first time doing that's like literally how I figured out what to write. I had these magical closets, and I was like, what kind of story would a character need to go into magical closets? What kind of character would need that? What would the circumstances be that would create that need? And I think that's sort of how they all end up going, with Eventown. Okay, I like come up with this perfect town. Who wants to go to a perfect town? It's the magic first, and then sort of, using sort of storytelling tricks to figure out how it would get the most like engaged, how you sort of, it's like you're going to make it, start working at its biggest intensity.
Yeah, I love that. That makes it feel like more accessible. Like I was saying, like I feel sort of like just stunted when I think about magic and was like, it's too hard, but like kind of starting with it makes it seem like it's like kind of easy, not easy, but a little bit easier to get into.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, we have a question from Mabel. I think I know who Mabel is.
Hi, Mabel.
Hi, Mabel. Mabel asks, what was the most fun jar of magic to think up? Oh, I love that.
Oh, gosh, that's a really great question. I mean, describing, I wouldn't say there was a particular description that was the most fun, but like the general, I love a list, the like general describing of the kinds of magic that were in the jars and trying to match the like texture and color and lightness of the magic with what it would do. Like that's as like mathematical as I get. Like that, that was so much fun trying to like make that feel sensical. I also really loved incorporating weather. I've long wanted to write a book that's like a magic and weather together, and maybe there's a bigger story there someday with that, but I loved being able to play with magic and weather in some like big moments in this book in particular.
I loved the weather parts. I thought those were really cool. So I would love to see you expand on that if you
right. Weather's
like
cool.
To in the future.
Like,
yeah, like I wanted to touch like the cloud magic and it was all like really cool. And I just like the cover is so great because it really like is a great representation, I think, of the book, definitely. But also it was just like, you could all, from your descriptions, they were so great. You could see like, oh, that shimmery magic, and like that's the one that creates the rainbow. And I loved it. So that's a great question.
Thanks,
All right.
Mabel.
Allison asks, for both of you, I wonder if this is also the Allison we know. Anyway, hi, Allison, whoever you are. For both of you, if you had to quarantine alone with one character from any one of your books, who would you choose?
Oh, God. Oh, boy. It's like I have to eliminate the main characters, right? Because they're all based so much on me that I'm sure I would drive myself like really... it would not be good, I'm sure. It would be a bad combo.
Yeah.
So I have to think beyond that. Oh, I know. And Rules for Stealing Stars. I don't know why Rules for Stealing Stars is on my mind so much, but
great book. I mean.
Thank you. There are 4 sisters in that book, and one of them is named Astrid, and she's like I always say that book I'm like in each of those characters. They're a side of me, but Astrid is like who I want to be. She's like really artsy, and she like can do all those visual art things, and she's so like chill about it and kind of like dreamy and spacey, and I would love to be around her because first of all she would like not bother you too much. She'd been in her own world, but there'd also you like come down to breakfast and there'd be like a magical tableau set up, and yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that would be fun. I agree that the main character is probably not anyone I want to spend already in this head too much. I don't need to be there anymore. Well, it's a little creepy because like I always like the dad characters that I write. Like one of my friends just read one of my books recently, and she was texting me, and she's like, "You and these dads," and I was like, "Yeah, I know." Just like kind of my thing. I don't know, but for a younger character, I don't know, probably Edie from The Only Black Girls in Town. She's just like, I don't know, this cool goth girl. She's 12, but she doesn't really care what anyone thinks. She's like very smart. Like the kids start calling her Wednesday Addams because she, is wearing like all black and has her hair in 2 braids. And she's just like, oh, and she like gives them a little mini lesson on the Addams family. And then she's like, just real original, guys. She just like seems to know like a little bit about everything. I think you would learn a lot from her, and you would also like never like doubt yourself around Edie because she's super confident. So
plus she's a New Yorker, so maybe you'd have to quarantine in New York.
That's true. I know. Yeah, she's a New Yorker who misses her bodegas and her egg and cheese sandwiches. So, which I don't.
I loved seeing some New York in that book.
I tried. I can't even talk about it naturally. I'm like, I think it's just an egg and cheese, not an egg and cheese sandwich, but I tried. Okay, we've got a couple more questions. Which section or scene from this book brought you the most joy to write? Oh, I love that.
Oh, wow. That's really hard. The most joy. Sorry, I always want to answer truthfully, and so sometimes that takes a minute. I love writing an ending. There's something about that, because I don't write from an outline, because I don't always know what I'm doing, when I figure out where the characters need to be, and then I find like a exciting way to get them there, like that's what's joyful. That's what's like fun. And you're on that like end of the roller coaster feeling of it where it's like inevitable. You're like, that's where it has to go. I just got to like get it in there. I just have to, position it exactly right. And so I always really love writing the endings. And I think this is too. I love finding like that image at the end, sort of less the scene and more the, what do I want? Like, what's that final image that we have to land on? I love finding that.
Yeah, I love that. I love your endings. I feel like even with this book, like I was like gearing up. I was like, all right, here we go. Like, how's she going to do this? Like, they're so good. And I find them incredibly hard. So I'm going to have to go back and look at some more of your endings to see how you get there. All right. Ooh,
magic, Brandy. You got to bring in the magic.
It's just magic. I know. One of these days, like my 25th book is going to have magic in it. And okay. Oh, yes. Let's see. Okay. This is from Alex Arnold. Hi, Alex. And this is something I was thinking about too, because I also love reading this in your books. And Alex asked, what kinds of food did you write about in this book?
Oh gosh. Oh no, I'm not going to remember now. There's definitely, there's a birthday party scene. I feel like I often have birthday party scenes. There's a birthday party scene that I think has food of it, or at least mentions other food from past times, and like a magical cake, which I swear I do other things and write books about magical cakes, but because Eventown also has a magical cake. Yeah, gosh, this might be like my lightest on food. Brandy, you've read it more recently than me, so I'm like, was there food in there?
Yeah, I don't think you've ever written a book that doesn't have pancakes in it. So there are definitely pancakes. Well, I loved I don't want to spoil anything, but I was wishing that we could have spent more time at that breakfast like celebration on New Year's Day. I don't want to spoil anything, but the description there was very great.
That's where all the food is.
Yes.
That's where all the food is. There is a breakfast celebration right after the scene I read.
Yeah.
There is a big breakfast. Gosh, how could I forget?
I know.
That was great to write.
That was it.
that was I didn't need to put it in the rest of the book because I put it all right there.
And I wanted like 2 chapters there, which is unrealistic. I get in trouble for writing about all the food I do. They're like, they're not foodies. Could you stop? And I'm just like, but everyone wants to read about food. So there was so much good food in that section.
Breakfast food. That's like my real forte. I actually got fully, my first editor, Anika Risi, fully left me a comment that was like, you gotta stop with the pancakes. Like I have been edited out of pancakes before.
I'm so glad I brought it up because I was like, oh, Corey, it's pancakes and French toast also. I think
I'm also like, don't tell Mabel. Like I don't want Mabel to know that.
That's true. Mabel,
I'm working these pancakes in. Mabel, don't edit out my pancakes.
Yeah, there was some really good food though. But that was the scene that stuck out to me. It was like the New Year's Day feast.
Yes.
Really good. I think I might have. Yeah. Okay. I think that was it. But I have one more question that I'm going to ask just because I know that you have something to answer this with. What's next for you?
Oh, yes. Okay. What's next? So the next book I have coming out is the 3rd book in my Hand-Me-Down Magic chapter book series. So I really love that series. It's the first 2 books came out this summer, and it's about 2 cousins who live in the city and whose family run a secondhand shop that has many objects in it that are maybe magical. And it's for sort of depending on the reader. It can be a good book to read together or when they're first reading on their own. So sort of 5 and up, I would say. And the 3rd book is about a perfect patchwork purse. And it might be my favorite book in the series. I really, really liked writing that one. That one is also about jealousy. So that was part of my jealousy moment. I wrote that book in One Jar of Magic. So I have that. I have the 4th book will come out, maybe about 9-10 months after that, I think. And then I have another young adult novel that will come out, I don't know, maybe in 2022. We'll see. That's a novel in verse. It's my first time writing a novel in verse. And it's also multi-generational. I think it's 5 or 6 generations in a family. So that's been a big undertaking. And then I will have another middle grade out in 2023 that is called Tree and is an adaptation of the myth of Daphne and Apollo. So that's sort of what I am working on these days. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. That was even more than I think I knew about all of those, but I kind of forgot. So yeah, very happy for all of us that we have so many more Corey Haydu books on the way.
I'm excited too that we have more books on the way as well. Brandy, is there anything that you can share with us that you have upcoming this year?
Oh, yeah. So I just co-adapted a book about, it's the rebellious life of Mrs. Rosa Parks that just came out. I think it came out the same day Corey's book did. I don't remember. It was sometime this month and sometime in February. I'm looking at the calendar, like, I don't know. So that came out. And then my next book will be my first nonfiction book. It's called Blackbirds in the Sky, and it's the story of the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. So that will be out October 5th, I believe. Haven't talked much about it, but there will be more coming, like a cover and a full description. But yes, so feels weird to say I'm excited about that, but I am excited because it's a lot of history that I think a lot of people don't know about. And it's a story that a lot of people didn't know about until just a couple of years ago when they watched Watchmen, that show on HBO. So yeah, that's my next book. Thank you for asking.
And Brandy's, Brandy's the only Black girls in town. Her first middle grade is so great, and just like you'll read it in one sitting and fall in love with the characters. So I can't recommend it enough, especially if you're feeling the relationship, friendship dynamics happening in One Jar of Magic. Then The Only Black Girls in Town is like the next book you have to read after.
Oh, thank you, Corey.
So now that you have a great list of books, you can go binge, everyone. And I was gonna say too, I know that it may feel weird to say excited about a book like that, but I didn't know about that massacre until I think within the past year. So I think it's so incredibly important that people know about it, because it's a big part of history that we don't get taught or told about like we should. So
it is, and it's really interesting. It's like when I was researching it and writing it, and it's just like it's not a singular incident, there's so many incidents that happen like that. And just seeing the things that led up to it, I think there's a lot of history that people are going to be really surprised by, because I was surprised, it's just like an ongoing pattern throughout the United States. But yeah, so thank you.
No, yeah.
When is that on again, Brandy?
October 5th, which sounds very far away, but we'll be here like tomorrow. And what is time in a pandemic anyway? So yeah.
If you close your eyes and blink, this year will be gone next. And also too, like it sounds like, Corey, you'll have like another 5 books out because you have so many projects going on as well.
Exactly.
But I mean, I know as a reader that is amazing, because they'll go through One Jar of Magic and then they'll be like, we need more. Yes. There's more good books coming out. But I am going to go ahead and thank everyone so much for joining us this evening. This was such a pleasure. And thank you so much to Corey and Brandy for sharing a very magical evening with us and talking about your books. And I think your books are some of the most important for the age range they hit in particular. So it means so much having books that are magical and fun, as well as books that also create a safe space for those kids to be able to talk about things that are not always easy to talk about or necessarily broached in society. So a big thank you for bringing that into their world. And on that note, everyone, we will say thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to purchase any of the books you've heard about tonight, you can click the link down below and we will see you at the next one. But thank you so very much to our authors. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
And we'll say good night, everyone. See you next time. Bye.